Well, Rishi Sunak has since confirmed that over a dozen tanks are now to be sent to Ukraine from the UK to assist their war effort. This is a change in UK government policy. Let's discuss it now with Bob Seeley, the former foreign correspondent in the USSR, Conservative MP now, of course. Bob, you also hold a PhD in Russian military strategy, I believe.
That's true, Tom.
So let's dive in. Why haven't we sent weapons like tanks until this stage?
Good morning, Tom. Good morning to your listeners and viewers. I think that's because there's been a nervousness in the West about doing so. So major pieces of kit like air power, like tanks, have in the past been seen as an escalation. But I think the Russian tactics of hitting civilian infrastructure and trying to make life hellish for the 40 million or so residents in Ukraine, or Ukrainian citizens, I think has changed that dynamic. I think the reason why we're doing it is to provide political leadership and political cover so that other countries will send their tanks as well. And primarily this is about sending German Leopard tanks, of which there are over 3,000 in Western Europe and North America.
It is interesting that the Germans have seemed to be very slow-moving on all of this at every stage. They do tend to catch up with the Western coalition, but only after a huge amount of political pressure. Is it your view that Germany now will send their Leopard tanks thanks to the leadership of countries like the UK?
I think there is still a problem, and the mood music from Berlin is that, and from Rheinmetall that made the tanks, is that they're not willing to send until next year, which is way too late. All the options facing Ukraine and frankly facing the Western alliance are bad, because this is a war that is killing thousands of people a week. The least bad option for the Western alliance is to now arm the Ukrainians to win the war this year. Everything else becomes more dangerous and more destabilizing for Europe and the world, because the more desperate and aggressive and violent Russia will become. So the least bad option is that the Ukrainians have the kit to win this year, and currently they don't have the kit to do that. They need a minimum of 200, 300 main battle tanks, Western main battle tanks, and probably 500 to 600 infantry fighting vehicles on top of the huge amounts of supplies. And the West has already been generous. But the least bad option, the least dangerous option for us now is to arm the Ukrainians to win this year. And if the Germans don't supply the tanks, that won't happen.
200 or 300 tanks seems like quite a lot in comparison to the just over a dozen that the United Kingdom are sending. Is the UK doing enough?
Yeah. Well, look, the UK could send 50 Challenger, and that would be great. But realistically, 14 is a squadron of tanks. And on a front line, which is over 1,000 kilometres, 14 tanks is not going to make a significant military difference, although it will be a considerable addition. If I remember my, armoured regiments, you need about 50. There's about 50 tanks in a regiment. So we're not even supplying a regiment of tanks to the Ukrainians. So this is about the politics of this. This is about us taking the lead, taking some flack, which we'll get from the Russians, and persuading other countries. And it's about not necessarily the Germans supplying the tanks themselves, but the Germans agreeing for other nations that have Leopard tanks to export them. So Finland, I think, has them. Poland has them. Austria has them. The Canadians have them. So it's about persuading these countries to give those tanks. The Danes have them, to maybe donate some of those tanks to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians want Leopard above all else because they seem to be versatile. There's a lot of them around. But if we can supply more ourselves, then we should be doing so. Look, credit for Rishi, credit for Ben for doing this. I think it's, again, really important leadership on behalf of the British. But we need to do more if we're going to enable the Ukrainians to win this year. And that is the least dangerous option for us all.
It's absolutely fascinating how this is so much more tactical than perhaps it would look at first inspection, that the British strategy has been about sort of pushing other countries to do similar things rather than it being our kit that makes the fundamental difference, as perhaps it did at the start of this war. Just finally, Bob Seeley.
I'm not so sure, just Tom, on that point, I mean, we think that NLAW saved the day. I don't quite buy that. I think it enabled us to say that we saved the day. I think the Javelin that the US had been supplying for years before were important. I think our training was useful, but actually what saved the day was the old-fashioned Soviet artillery the Ukrainians had, and that enabled them to defeat the Russians just north of Kiev. So I think we are in danger of overplaying. We played an important role, for sure, but actually if we'd had more nous, the way to avoid this war would have been arming the Ukrainians properly beforehand, and I'm very sorry that didn't happen, because thousands of people are now dying as a result of President Putin's opportunism and disastrous adventurism.